welcome back to Aimless Ramblings. This is episode 26, and we're going to be discussing the working title, which is Alienation in a Post-Industrial Society. And because, it is so vague, I'm going to go and begin off discussing how communities changed over that period of time. So, community in a pre-industrial society was mainly focused around a couple of tenets, which was religious community. Then there was also festival community, and there's a third element here. So pretty much it was just like identity, and your identity was based around your community. And obviously there was a geographical thing, because it's pretty hard to be part of a community when you physically couldn't meet in your lifetime due to, traveling constraints. However, in a post-industrial society, we ran into this issue where a lot of people were getting less and less time to be participating in these community activities. And as such, in the post-industrial world, in the last years when the internet sort of became this major thing and whatnot, we've all tried to seek out something. And as in the past, we had religion and, geographics as our sort of thing and the term they throw around is neo-tribalism, to sort of form tribes. Apparently, the thing they've decided is the new thing that allows you to form a community around and escape alienation is to link value to products. So I guess you could, say if you own an Apple phone, you're part of the tribe/community of people who own Apple phones, which sort of makes a little bit of sense, but it's very hard to extrapolate out because you can feel like the articles that I was running into were very focused more on how to exploit it than the reasoning behind why it is. Do you guys have any kind of say on that idea that like the physical things are now what we see as this sort of thing and how we escape from alienation? However, it also in and of itself creates alienation.
I think, Simon, in some ways, brand consumerism is kind of a natural outgrowth of capitalist competition. Like the idea of establishing brand loyalty is a massive part of marketing. It's a really important thing in terms of, developing and understanding your market share and then how you can inculcate a sense of brand loyalty. And I think in some ways, brand loyalty, which historically would have come from maybe, if you were a particularly good tailor in a town or a city, then you would attract more business because of the quality of your product. But at some point, that mental heuristic becomes so deeply engraved within like a particular group community or a particular group that you just become the tailor and your family becomes the tailors that provide X to X community. And so in some ways, brand loyalty, I don't necessarily think is I think brand loyalty is just the exploitation of that same mental shortcut that has always existed. But like with all things in a highly capitalistic and consumerist society, it's just amped up to 11 because you're trying to maximize your bottom line. You're saying say something?
Yeah, so the only reason that I personally find it's a little bit different is in the respect that there's brand loyalty, but these almost seem to encourage a sort of you are loyal to this brand, and as such, you have to have the them, which is, for example, everybody that's devoted to iPhone and Apple is got to have this like negative association with Windows and Android because there's this other, and that's it. I feel like that's the difference between brand loyalty and this sort of like tribalism around, if I am this, then I hate X. And even if you don't personally have that feeling, it's this sort of encouragement of that ideology that simply by enjoying one thing, the other thing becomes this sort of demonized version of it. Sam, you had something you want to say?
I definitely know that exists, but I'm not sure how strongly it exists in the majority of, say, technology users. If you take your average Windows user, I'm not sure they would really have a strong opinion about anything else because to an incredibly large portion of people, it's just the default they experience. Say you take your average 7-year-old that has an iPhone because their child bought it for them or whatever. I don't expect they'll have a whole lot of this fervor. They'll have brand loyalty, most likely. They'll continue to use the product they use because it's the product they know. But I don't know if they would belong to that subset you're talking about. And as I said, I know it exists, but I do wonder how much of the market share, for lack of a better term, it makes up. Thoughts, Tim?
I do agree with you, Sam, and I definitely think that there are people that obviously are going to sit between these niches, and it's always going to be the noisy minorities on the fringes, which sort of make up almost the trope of the angry Mac user or the angry PC user, like beating each other over the heads with respective laptops / MacBooks. But please don't sue me for copyright, anybody. Basically, what I do think though is that consumption of tangible physical products, purchase of tangible physical products, keeping up with the Joneses. I know we talked about it in an earlier episode, going on overseas holidays, and I think that all of these things and the summation of the identity that you have by owning these things and doing these things, I think can provide a sense of identity. I think there are definitely people that benchmark themselves on the basis of the house they live in, the car they drive, and potentially one of the facets of modern society, and by modern I don't mean it in the 20th century sense, but in terms of the contemporary society we live in, a person's not necessarily worth or value is defined by any singular brand that they participate in, but by the consumerist praxis that they go through on a day-to-day basis. Do you think that's maybe that's an interpretation of how traditional identities, which and once again, if the Brexit campaign and Donald Trump has shown is that traditional nationalist and ethnic identities are still pretty strong. Are they something that now sits alongside a sort of a consumptive identity that is on the basis of I only drink fair trade coffee, or is it something that in some people has subsumed it entirely? Simon?
And, I always preface this with, the complexity of humanity. We have different faces for different people indeed. But, yeah, definitely I feel like it's sort of that you can't have anything happen. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And as such, I feel that, yes, all these identities exist. So, for example, you have the person that is devout to their, ethnicity, devout to their religion, and then devout to their products. However, I feel like there is still a tiny bit of overlap of those three in respect. So, for example, not saying that it won't happen, but if you are in the Bible Belt, sometimes simply by the fact that you have, well, I'll use a better example. A lot of people in New Orleans, Soul, go to Soul churches simply because that is accessible, because it's geographical, and also because that's probably, a sort of societal expectation. And as such, therefore, their ethnic identity and then their spiritual identity, I feel like both of those would somehow also have an impact on their identity as a consumer. And I'm just saying that those three communities would probably come together. I feel like I'm just sort of covering over things, but yes. Sam, you had something?
I wonder if that's true and unique to a post-industrial society. If you go to, say, medieval southern Germany, you're going to go to the church that's available, and for an extended period of time it's Catholic, and then the Protestant Revolution as such happens, and then that church becomes Protestant. So convenience has definitely always been a part of, I think, people's identity, not so much just a post-modern, post-industrial, So, yeah, and again, consumer products are definitely new, but again, I don't know really whether consumer products are an aspect of the post-industrial world. Even in the industrial world, you would have had certain products you were loyal to. I can't think of any because I don't, live in 18th century England, but I'm sure, someone's radio radioactive toothpaste, you would have been loyal to that brand. Don't know, thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking about that whole entire thing of, if they're, especially in Ireland, that like if you were of Catholic, then you would support Catholic businesses, and as such, 100%. I think I've probably just dug myself into a hole, and that's the reason why you guys are going to help me get out of it. So I think we're going to hand you over to Tim. Tim, you have something you want to discuss about a thing I don't understand.
That's all right, Simon. I don't necessarily agree. I think that part of the issue is that in Western historiography, we always have a tendency to try and delineate sharp errors and ages, and sort of rather there's much more of a blending. I do think that brand loyalty and the impact of a trademark on a particular, and like buying into a group by buying a particular product as opposed to, buying a particular product because that is how that particular product has always been or is always associated with your identity, is something that might be unique to a sort of a modern and postmodern society. But something I do think that is a little bit interesting in terms of a postmodern society or a post-industrial society in particular is the advent that actually Simon raised originally when we were discussing what we're going to do for this episode, and that was the idea of the bullshit job. And I'm going to discuss that idea through the concept of presenteeism. So, a bullshit job, just to understand in terms of like the discussion, the idea is that there is a whole bunch of people right now who are doing a whole bunch of work that, throughout the private and the public sector that doesn't actually contribute to anything. Look, I mean, I could always go for the classic low blow funny humor. Like, there was a lot of people that used to be employed by the Catholic Church during, the 1000s, and they weren't particularly doing a lot either. But the issue seems to be that even though historically, whether they be in a religious or a ritual function, that people who might not be seen as tangibly contributing to society, at least they were felt to be contributing to the spiritual worth. Whereas now there is a bunch of people who are doing all kinds of jobs, be they, the undersecretary to the human resource manager for goldfish massage therapists, who they sit at work and don't really, even to themselves, feel like they can justify what they're doing. And I mean, I've been there. I've done some jobs where I've literally sat there and I felt like that I'm going to go insane because I'm not actually tangibly producing something that is contributing to a decision or contributing to a change in society, or even in the classical sense, like the Marxist sense of alienation, a worker being alienated from the product of their work, physical, tangible object that they're creating because of the factory methodology of production and the industrial method of production, saw the worker being alienated from the tangible fruits of their labor. But for us, in a post-industrial society, we are so many layers abstracted, whether it be through bureaucracy or administration or just IT, that we don't even see the tangible inputs to the tangible outputs of what we're doing. And for some of us, it's not even the fact that it's hidden to us. It's because we understand that we actually aren't producing anything. And one of the things I think is interesting in terms of this idea of presenteeism is, I think in some ways this is probably more of something that is symptomatic of the post-industrial condition. And feel free to slap me down on this. So presenteeism in terms of work health and safety or an occupational health and safety concept is the idea of people coming into work when they're sick, and they're there, but then they're working at a suboptimal capacity. And that's where the term originally comes from. Although it has been appropriated by sociologists, commentators, talking about like the idea, and generally it tends to be quite management orientated and focused, like the idea that people come into work and will do an amount of work, but then will stay at work because there's a perception that they need to be there for so many hours, or they need to, get their FaceTime with the boss so the boss sees them in the office for so long, so that, the boss is like, all right, you've been working late hours. I know that you are really contributing to the team, just because, the management style's on the basis of, I've seen you in and around the office, you must be working hard. But I suppose if we are talking about people and entire societies who feel like there's no connection between between what the work they do on a day-to-day basis and improving society or even interacting with broader society, could we look at bullshit jobs or or any form of employment where people don't necessarily see or feel a tangible improvement or tangible interaction with the economy or with society as a form of presenteeism? Like, are we just going through the motions, knowing that we're a flywheel spinning without an attachment to anything, because that's what one does? Simon?
I personally feel like bullshit jobs, as I probably should have put at the very start. It's pretty much an extension of this really interesting concept that was brought up in one thing, where as things got more efficient, progressively the number of days of work seemed to decrease for a period of time there. There was a period of time, I think Henry Ford gave a day off, and the reason why was because he wanted people to buy shit. So they weren't buying stuff while they were in the factories. So he's like, okay, cool. So if I give them a day off, then they have a day of leisure. So therefore, they're actually going to spend money and start putting. But it reached a particular point where the day should have been getting shorter and shorter, and we should have been working less and less days. However, there was this idea that you had to work 5 days, and they had to be there because that's how efficiency works. However, as you've got more efficient, the fact that you're keeping them there for a 9 to 5 period of time, you actually are getting less productive, simply by the fact that you are having to, for want of a better word, waste hours to meet your quota. And so I feel like a bullshit job is the extension of that. And I'm pretty sure, you hit nail on the head before we were discussing this sort of, posturing, being around so that the boss can see you. But it's even like worse than that. It's simply that they feel like they need to have you in to prove that they have you in, so they can go, yep, cool, we have X amount of employees doing X amount of stuff. And I feel like as a response to this sort of thing, there's this sort of movement towards part-time employment so they can justify the lessened hours which would come from being able to do stuff more efficiently. And it's a very difficult sort of balance to keep. But I feel like I'm just sort of running out of steam here, so I'm going to hand you back to Sam. Sam has...
Slightly off topic, and I'm all for derailing things, so that's fine. I do wonder, if, say, we clicked our fingers and overnight the bullshit jobs disappeared, the things that ultimately are busy work, and if we invested, half a year's worth of someone's wage in, we'd be able to automate it entirely. What does that person do? You say, like, the classic response is, they will create works of art. They will, socially contribute to society. But I mean, I've met a lot of these people, and they really wouldn't be able to do that. And like, the only thing that keeps them from, drinking themselves to death, or, pursuing an incredibly aggressive narcotics habit, is the fact that they have a job. So are bullshit jobs in and of themselves bad? Because will we possibly actually ever have a society that is capable to have a large portion of it, not, just ticking the 9 to 5, doing the presenteeism? You both got your hands up, so I'll just jump to Tim first.
So I think this, it's a very valid question, Sam, because I think the rise of the quote-unquote unnecessariate, the group of people who aren't employable, who aren't
brilliant.
able, yeah, exactly, are not capable of reskilling and being reused in a, and that's the thing. Once again, we've got to remember a lot of these perspectives we're talking about are very much from like economists or managers or people at like the top end of town. So they tend to be pretty tool orientated instead of like, humanity or compassionate orientated. But the thing is I think you're really seeing that play out in places like the States. The Rust Belt Detroit, aspects of the deindustrialization of Australia and Britain. A lot of those northern towns in England, which are and Wales, basically, which have been completely gutted by the process of deindustrialization, and part of that was it was just cheaper to move things overseas. But it's the same outcome as eventually all those jobs disappear due to automation because it becomes cheap enough. And that's why unbridled. I would suggest unbridled capitalism doesn't really have the answer in terms of, because eventually, the capitalist answer is well, if they can't keep up with the system, too bad, so sad. And the historic, as you were saying, Sam, the historic answer in places like Australia was the state was the employer of last resort. Although since the 1980s, that definitely hasn't been the case. And I think there is something inherent about the dignity of work. It's the idea that providing a purpose for being that stops the existential void of nothingness, eating you up from the inside. Simon?
Yeah, and then there's also this extension, as you were discussing, this sort of existential dread from not being able to work, and work is sin's thing. There's also this issue which people don't understand. They're okay, cool, well, we'll just save money by not giving these jobs. And then you forget that it costs money to have these people in your society regardless, because obviously then you need to be funding all the things for people who can't work. So, at the very least, you've got, job seeker or the equivalent. So I can speak that, shite about that because that's me. I'm a waste of space. Stealing your tax dollars, yo. Yeah, so it's this idea that a lot of people go, oh, well, cool. Well, if we get rid of all these jobs, then we'll be able to save money in that respect. But then you have to put money into protecting these particular areas. So then you work out what can you do with these people? And I feel like there is a percentage of them which obviously are just untrainable, unskillable individuals. However, I feel like there's a percentage of them which physically the bare minimum to get into the workforce is too high for them to. It's the barrier to entry is just too high for somebody whose skill set is being able to break rocks, because there's a machine that can do that. So it's how do we find for low skill work, how do we develop that without undermining the development of a more efficient way? Because you're not going to want to pay more to hire people to be able to do a job that you can do for cheaper and more efficiently with a machine, and it's this endless cycle. Tim?
I was just going to say, I'm seeing a burgeoning business in artisanal rock breaking.
That is fair. Yeah. So I think we've reached the point where we something about is it hermits or hobos, Mister? No, hobos is an offensive word. Sorry. Homeless individuals.
I thought hobo was the term they chose. But I mean, a hobo isn't a homeless person. It is a homeless person, but it's not just a no one. They're migrant workers, really, aren't they?
I don't know the specifics, but I'm sure you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, a hobo is a Great Depression term for migrant workers, and I think they used it themselves. But anyway, I'm sure we also insult the homeless people with it. Vaguely, I'm going to talk about I'm going to be mean and I apologize, but weird fucking people that live at home forever or live by themselves forever. So there's this growing trend. I'm going to butcher this, so anyone that ever speaks Japanese and hears this, I'm so incredibly sorry. Hikikomori? Tim, help.
Hikikomori. You got it right.
I'm so great. Hikikomori. So essentially, they live at home forever. They have no intention of ever leaving their parents' house. They almost never leave their rooms. Those that aren't with their parents will have food delivered. Occasionally, they do actually work, though, which is interesting. So they will do work that can be entirely done remotely, or they live on social welfare. But broadly speaking, they have chosen a life of almost entire isolation. So they don't leave their houses. They get pretty much all the interaction they have through the internet. Choose they to socially interact on the internet or not is different. Some do, some don't. And it is incredibly strange. It's also really prominent. This is in Japan, obviously, but it's also quite prominent in Russia. In Moscow and the like, you have a lot of people who they call them recluses there, though, but have 10, 15, 20 years. They've lived pretty much in a Soviet bloc era building on state support. They often have pets, but that's it. And I wonder if this is possibly like an outcome of our post-industrial society. Are we going to wind up with a subset of people that, I don't know, this kind of ties in nicely what I was going to talk about anyway, so I think might explore this more than what I was going to talk about, is whether or not we're going to wind up with this subset of people that, because they can't actively contribute, all they will do is stay at home and consume. These people have food delivered to them. They take all their entertainment pretty much from online means. Do they just live in their houses? And it's really strange. I'll get you in one sec, Tim. And is part of this impending doom, for lack of a better term, and these unnecessariates, as you call them, Tim, which I think is a brilliant term, that know it's coming. They know that they can't compete or so forth, and they just don't even try. Tim?
So in answer to your question, I think so. Did you use the term NEET yet? NEET? So not in education, employment, and training.
Not yet, but that's where I was headed. Yeah.
Yeah. So NEETs and otakus, as they were called, as well. In although that tends to be a particular subset in Japan. These recluses, I think, in some ways, is a similar reaction to someone who picks up an opioid habit, or someone who takes to petty crime, or as a potential, when people face hopelessness, and I think hopelessness is the issue here. And I think there's actually a riposte to that regarding NEETs in a second, but I think that one of the reactions that you can take is to remove yourself from society, because society essentially disappoints you. And I think that this is actually, we have a pretty long historical sort of narrative of this, the Taoists in China, when you're talking about Lao Tzu or Zhuangzi, the idea, well, particularly for Zhuangzi, he talks about the idea of this tree, and they see this tree in the town, and it's all warped and it's all fucky, and he's like, well, this tree is useless. You can't turn it into a cupboard. You can't make a boat out of it. Why have we even got it here? And the tree answers well, if I was, tall, straight, and beautiful, I would have been made into a boat or a cupboard, and I wouldn't be here. And it's sort of this idea of cultivated uselessness to avoid, selection and destruction. And that comes out of the issues of being involved with a very venal and destructive court life in China. But I mean, in some ways, Christian recluses and hermits in Europe follow the same sort of idea, removing themselves from a sinful and disgusting society to find a more religious and spiritual life, which they can benefit themselves, and replicated once again with the in India, where you have many people going through their 4 stages of their life, and the final stage is to become a sadhu, become a religious mystic, withdrawn from the world, and in some cases, like in the Jains, for instance, actually go through the process of starving themselves to death. But I think that the uniquely postmodern aspect of this is, rather than sort of, being disappointed with the world and disappointed with politics, or disappointed with the sinfulness or the venality of the world, and instead turning inward to find spiritual enlightenment. Maybe for the NEET, it's a mechanism of fantastical escape. It's escapism. And as much as a particular form of drug use can be a form of escapism. I think Simon had his hand up first, but then Sam.
And also, yes. So, in so this sort of neat development. Obviously, from an economic standpoint, you're creating another customer class as such. So you can create a whole entire economic system around the existence of these people. If it becomes a thing, they simply, as you said, they need to desire food. And I think that even subsisted even from, recluse monasteries. If they required something, that was employing somebody to, collect the things and take it up to the monastery and deposit it. It's this sort of idea that you create jobs even out of, hypothetically, so it's like, is that a bullshit job, or is that just a change of the economic thing to create useful jobs in a changing society? So therefore, in the fact that they are not, or 100%, 100 full-time consumers, are they creating jobs? And as such, do they somehow get to a point where they are removing themselves from the neat class to create jobs to service the neat class? Anyway, Sam, you wanted to say something?
It's a very interesting point, Sam. Yeah, some of the stuff I read, it really seems like it's a fear of failure. If I try, I will probably fail, so therefore I won't try, because why try if I will fail? And I have no idea why this is the case. If I think I could solve the problem, I'd be worth a lot of money, right? But from what I can see, it's definitely an increasing trend. You are having, especially in countries, this could be related, I'm not really sure. So Russia and Japan have two very distinct things in common: a comparatively stagnant economy and a dropping birth rate. And I know Japan's got what they call the herbivore men, or something equally offensive, I guess. And Russia may have a comparable, I'm not really sure, which is essentially, the loss of traditional manliness as such, which I guess in the West maybe you'd call it a soy boy or whatever. And I wonder how much this ties into it, with the failure, I'm going to call it, of traditional male gender role within the modern society. There is no need for an aggressive, strong male as such, right? So if you can't find where you fit anymore, maybe not trying, because it's also predominantly males that have the failure to launch thing. Maybe it's we need to get better at building more resilient males, because the traditional archetype of male just doesn't actually function terribly well, especially as soon as you have, this stagnant economy, because, the traditional archetype male functioned well as a salary man in, 1980s Japan. 1990s Japan, it was primarily jumping out of the 11th story floor. Tim?
I definitely think that the fragmentation of traditional roles and the sense of purpose that they provide, although we should also recognize that the fragmentation of these roles has been quite liberating to people that, don't necessarily fall into those traditional roles or positions, has definitely created a crisis of purpose. And I think you sort of bang on the money there, Sam, when you're talking about people. I think the fear of failure and a lack of purposelessness are kind of two slightly distinct things, but both feed into this thing. And when you're talking about this breakdown of traditional roles and breakdown of traditional metrics of success, I definitely think that is one side of the coin. The other side with the fear of failure, and it's something that would be interesting to see if you did a broader study across cultures. When societal success is defined by pretty insane standards in terms of work ethic, in terms of time spent away from home, in terms of the intensity and pressure, the pressure cooker of the employment system in 1980s Japan, and even arguably they have I can't remember the name, but there's a term in terms of in Japanese for death by overwork. It maybe if you look at Russia, and I'm not really 100% sure, but maybe in terms of Russia's working culture, maybe they're not working necessarily as hard as the Japanese, but maybe like the metrics for success in the business place, because essentially you can argue in Russia, you're working with a state that is working in a state capture system where, it's all about criminal contacts and who you know. And so it doesn't matter how much work or effort or talent you have. If you don't have those connections, then you're destined to failure. And in Japan, similar thing, like, there's always going to be someone willing to walk over your body because they work, that much harder. And so maybe in places where it's harder to earn a large amount of money, and I mean, money is a really easy metric by which people can measure the success of their life. That's where, the stagnating economy side of it comes in as well. That's potentially that other side of the coin rather than just the fragmenting of social roles. Simon?
I definitely found it quite interesting, the idea that you brought up of, there's the fear of fail. You linked the fear of failure and then the drop. So you said there was the stagnation of economy and the drop in birth rates. And I feel like definitely the gender role element where you were discussing that traditional male gender roles of, going out and being the salary man on the male side means that you have this sort of idea that you can't achieve. But on the other side, you have a lot of females who have the issue that they have to try and take on both gender roles at the same time. So they have to be the salary person, but you also have to be at home the caring mother. You also have to be. So there's this sort of dichotomy of one is having it stripped out, the other one is having it laid on top, which means that they have to try and be two opposing things at the exact same time. So I feel like it's not beneficial to any member of the society. And as such, I feel like the alienation just gets stronger and stronger because you don't have time to, sort of try and do anything. If on one hand you have no, agency because you feel like your gender role doesn't exist, and the other one feels that they have to try and fulfill both gender roles. Tim?
Well, yeah, I think unfortunately, once again, we've been very good at diagnosing the problem. And yet, as Sam said, we'd be quite rich otherwise. It's quite difficult to find a solution. Anyway, everyone, thanks again for tuning in, and we'll hope to see you next time.
This great warrior has left to his mighty Lord.